Hello. So, this is still the podcast of Piercing Through the Cacophony, and I am Rachel Heimbaugh. And I'm going to start doing it this way, hopefully, where we have YouTube links. It will also be on your favorite podcast players, just the audio version. That way, on YouTube, I can have it captioned at the bottom for better accessibility, as well as I just appreciate seeing people's faces, so I feel like I'm interacting with them, which may just be a me thing, but you can also follow this on a regular podcast player too. But we are going to start this series talking about anxiety. Now, on the one hand, anxiety is a pretty common phrase. I think a lot of people have a general understanding of it. And that's a good indicator of greater acceptance within a society when there are more words to describe something, when it's something that more people are talking about, right? What also happens though is that people maybe misattribute what it actually is. False information can be spread about it and stuff like that. And so what I want to do in this first episode is reframe anxiety for us. And that short little intro I did on the Facebook page, you can check that out. I talk about how anxiety is very similar to when an infant is teething. Okay. Now, what we've traditionally viewed anxiety as, it's on a spectrum. Okay. Whoop, where am I on the camera here? I'll scoot this way. It's on a spectrum. All right. So you might have anxious thoughts sometimes. You might be apprehensive or uncertain about something, but that is different than anxiety as a diagnosable condition, anxiety that brings about physical responses, right? These psychosomatic connections that we have, whether that's panic attacks, whether that's freezing, whether that's the inability to breathe, breaking out in hives even, right? There's all these physical responses that can happen, not to mention all of the emotional, mental, spiritual responses that happen as well. So it's on a spectrum, and what we've generally viewed anxiety in its full-blown diagnosable state as is an inconvenience. So for a long time, someone would be going about in their life, okay, and then out of nowhere, boom, they are hit with they can't breathe and they feel hot and they feel sweaty and maybe they fall to the ground, okay, and they didn't know what it was. Maybe someone else is going about in their day and they hear a noise and all of a sudden they freeze and they forget where they are, and then a little bit later they're in the same spot but they're not sure what happened. Someone else could go into a room, say full of people, right? Social anxiety. And all of a sudden they're unable to talk. They're unable to say any sentences and they just hide in the corner. And so we would have these responses occurring and it would feel off, right? Because we go along in our normal bustling day-to-day lives and it would crop up like there was something wrong, okay? Like it was an inconvenience, like it was the problem. And so our response to anxiety traditionally has been, whether with therapists or doctors or just as individuals, is to, when something pops up and we think that's the thing that's wrong, we take it and we try and calm it, settle it, squelch it, get rid of it, right? Because it wasn't there before. So surely that is the problem. If I enter a room and I can't interact with people, that is the problem. So let me find some skills, um, take some medicine or drink a little bit of wine, whatever I need to be able to interact with other people. Or maybe I'll just avoid that situation altogether, right? Anxiety, it can impede how we parent. It can impede relationships with our spouses. All of these different areas that when anxiety rears its head, it can cause us to either have really grand responses to things or really diffused, numb responses to things. And we generally see those secondary reactions as the problem. That's how we've treated it traditionally. But when we look at an infant, for example, who is teething, so they've got all those, it's just their gums, right? And they have their baby teeth. And once the baby teeth start pushing through, it starts to cause problems. For some babies, they'll be really fussy. They can't sleep at all. For mine, some of mine, they would get ear infections and, they'd nurse 24 hours a day to try and take away the pain. And for others of my kids, it bothered them some, but it wasn't quite as intense. So the wrong strategy would be to say, gosh, where are these teeth coming from? The teeth must be the problem, right? Let's remove all the teeth, or let's just ignore all the teeth and hope that they disappear. That won't help it either, because as we know, babies must have their teeth in order to chew foods, right? And so we have options in dealing with that. We can, there's the teething drops and the teething necklaces, right? You can do this holistic approach. There are doing a cool wet cloth is more an in between, or some ice, and a mesh thing so they don't choke on it, whatever. Even for, there's medicine, right, that you can give your child, or Oragel to take away the pain. And similarly with anxiety, then, we see that every human has experiences within their life. And within our lives, we all respond differently to those experiences. Okay. I have one child who would sleep great. I have another child who sleep was from the devil, they just have their different responses. And so the one child who's left alone in his crib is totally fine, right? Because that's what he wanted. He wanted to soothe himself to sleep. Our other child, that was not the case. And so what happens is we have these experiences over our lifetime that build up within us these stress responses. And over time, then, those stress responses compound together and we have anxiety. Anxiety can be viewed as this culmination of our body's response to stress, to trauma. Now, not everyone who experiences a body's traumatic response has experienced abuse. Anyone who has experienced abuse is going to have traumatic responses and traumatic stressors within their body. But for other individuals who maybe you don't have a memory of being abused and you just, you feel like you came from a pretty normal, safe environment, you can still have a culmination of stressors within you that maybe if they were left unresolved, then build up. And anxiety is our bodies and our minds and our soul's way of saying, hey, there's something here that's trying to come out. Kind of like the teeth. We can't function. I can't function as my 37-year-old self. Is that how old I am? 36-year-old self. If I don't have all of these parts of me aligned together. Functioning can be hard because I will always have these parts that are kind of like phantom puzzle pieces that are trying to fit back in together. So they send out a call, hey, take care of me. And sometimes that can be through panic attacks. Sometimes that can be through chest tightening up. Sometimes that can be through feeling itchy or feeling like you need to avoid a situation. Because anxiety is not the disruption itself. Anxiety is an indicator that there are threads woven within us that are needing healing, that are wanting to find their place within our body and within our mind and within our soul. And so for us to reframe how we view anxiety, it is 100% totally okay to take medicine for anxiety. There are times where we need that stability, right? You need to get to a certain threshold to be able to function, to be able to take care of your kids, to be able to go to work, to be able to work out, to then build up your, positive hormones, to be able to be in a relationship with someone else. That is totally okay. All right. With teething, at times when we say we give a baby Orajel, the numbing gel, and we rub it on, one way that it numbs the gums so they don't feel the pain is that it kind of numbs those nerve endings, and it causes them actually to be a bit harder. And when it does that, it's helping relieve the pain, but it is also making it a bit more challenging for the tooth to come through. It's still going to happen because that's how it's designed to happen, but it can actually make it harder. The same thing as like putting frozen things on it, right? Ice will harden the gum, it'll numb it, but make the process a bit harder. And so when we do take medicine for anxiety to get to that threshold, to be able to like, okay, I can actually wake up in the morning, I can enter this space and not feel like the walls are closing in on me. We need to do that with the understanding that the medicine is to help us function. It is not to silence the inconvenience of the anxiety. If we are trying to silence the inconvenience, the pain, the struggle related to the anxiety, we are going to then silence what is calling out inside of us that needs attention, that needs help, that needs to be tenderly held in that place. One of the best things that we can do when we experience anxiety, whether you choose to take medication for it, whether you choose to say go and do a meditation, or for me, I find that my anxiety peaks when I have too much caffeine or not enough water. And so that's something I have to just keep an eye on in my life. And it's not just like, oh, I feel so anxious. It's like it hits anxiety. And um, we have to be able to make those behavior changes, make those modifications, while also recognizing that we have these treasures in us, these jewels, these teeth that are trying to come out so we can more wholly interact with others, so we can approach life bringing all of our parts to the forefront. And so I wanted us to we'll get there. So, side note, for me, when my first son was born, I hadn't realized that I had lived with like anxiety and depression for many years. And so when my first son was born, we have a 2-story house, and I would sit up in the room all day or sit in the living room all day. And my husband at first thought it was just because I had a C-section, so I didn't want moving around or whatever. And I finally was able to tell him that it's because when I walked down the hallway we have like an open hallway thing in our second story, I would have to walk holding this baby, right? And with my hand on the wall, repeating to myself, you're not going to drop him off the edge. You're safe. You're on the other side. You're on the other side. I was terrified of walking by this huge open area. Now, okay, yes, I'm adjusting to having a new kid and I want to make sure my child's safe. But because my behaviors, my daily routine, all of that was directly impacted because of this obsessive fear that I was going to drop my baby, that I was going to, I was somehow this terrified, I'm not a good enough mom, right? And all of this anxiety, it kind of ties in together. And so for me, I thought, well, it's just postpartum, right? Because, that it happens. And after he started to grow up, I realized, no. This was a catalyst moment to reveal all of the layers of anxiety that had been going on before. Everything that had been sitting in and sifting in and simmering inside of me just had never had a prime way to come out before. So I would experience it in ways like having a panic attack walking into church. And I would tell myself, well, church is supposed to be a safe place, right? panic attacks don't fit here. And instead of recognizing, maybe there's a reason you don't feel safe here. Maybe there's a reason why your throat's closing up. Maybe your body and your mind and your heart are trying to tell you something. And so what we find is when we have these moments over and over and over again, they will start to crop up in different places when they aren't addressed. With a baby, okay? A lot of women have anxiety about how they were raised, about how maybe they were treated or how they respond in their sexual identity and just how their body functions and works. They don't have a good awareness of that. And those internalized stressors build up over time. And so what I wanted us to think about, if you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, you can go and read it this week. But normally we jump into this story with Red Riding Hood where she has been sent off on a journey, right? And so she goes into these dark, creepy woods and she has to take this food to her grandma. And I always question, what mother sends their child into the woods? And she runs into this axe man, or woodsman, whatever you call him, lumberjack, which in itself, right, she runs into this stranger. And there's a wolf that's following, and there's all these challenging situations that happen, right? One of the primary ways that we need to reframe our anxiety is to look at a story like Little Red Riding Hood and realize that she did not just end up in the woods with a basket of food, sent on a hazardous journey, set up to fail. We're going to read between the lines here. But if Little Red Riding Hood was going off on this journey, we can assume, if she had a pretty good mom, that her mom had already walked that path with her hundreds of times before, right? Now, do you remember this tree? Do you remember this fork in the road? Do you remember how we do this? And they had practiced it over and over and over again, right? She was going to see a grandma who was a familiar person to her. She was going, and she obviously had earned the privilege and shown responsibility enough times that her mom knew she could carry this bag of goodies to her grandma, that she could take care of a sick grandma. She had already, in her short little Red Riding Hood life, experienced responsibility, had taken care of herself, had already practiced these paths in her mind. And so then when she's in the middle of a really daunting, intense situation, she's able to see through the, wolf's tricks, and she's able to get help, and she's able to save the grandma and all this stuff simply because she already had a foundation of skill. She had built up her capacity, and she knew that she was capable in that situation. I don't think her mom had had her run what if we run into wolf simulations before, right? But she had enough practice in other areas to know I can handle this one. And so one of the greatest things that we can do for anxiety is in our calm moments is to remember, what have I already done? For me, cooking dinner for 5 kids, like during the summer, 3 times a day is like, I reach a point where I can't handle it. Okay. And depending on what's happened through the day, that could be the thing that sets me off and I'm like, can't function that night. And so what I've been starting to do is to recognize and say, narrow it down. What have I done before? What have I already practiced doing? How many times have we already made dinner, right? How many times have we already successfully navigated this path? It may not remove the challenge or the hard part of that moment that you're in. There may be an extenuating circumstance, right? However, to remember that I have already done this numerous times before. I am skilled and able in doing it. And if I don't feel like I can right at this moment, I'm going to hold that in a safe, compassionate space. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to shame myself for it. I'm also not going to go drink an extra glass of wine or go take another pill. I am going to choose to sit with myself in the discomfort of this moment, okay, and recognize, where am I? And when we can do that and recognize I am on this path that I have walked 100 times before, I can take maybe the next step, or I can sit crisscross and just wait here, or I can make a phone call and ask someone for help, What time will you be home? Can you get pizza, please? And we can have these strategies. So then we can learn to navigate those moments of high anxiety when we are also building up and empowering ourselves to know I am capable even if I don't always feel like it. We need to also welcome the moments of panic, the moments of overwhelming, and the moments of freezing as simply being a part of our journey. When it shows up, if we can respond to it in a way, maybe not during it, but after the fact of, thank you, self, for showing me that there's something else in me that's trying to ask for help. If we can view it that way as a welcomed part of ourself instead of an inconvenience, something that needs to be ostracized or rejected from ourselves, that will help us to feel less shame. That also helps us then long term to be able to feel safe in dealing with the roots of the different anxieties, maybe the stress, trauma, or abuse that maybe has occurred. And so at some point this week, take the chance to read through Little Red Riding Hood. Maybe think through, get creative. You can even interact, involve your kids in this and say like, okay, so what strategies or techniques or skills would Little Red have already needed before she went on this journey? And what's something in your life that is a consistent struggle point, a consistent moment of breakdown? And looking before that then and saying, okay, so what are the things I do know how to do? And affirm that part of yourself. And the third thing is to, when you have moments of high anxiety, or when maybe you don't, but you are friends with someone who does, help affirm that part of them. Not like, yay, let's throw an anxiety party, but to be able to say all of what you are experiencing right now is valid, and it is big, and it is worth it to explore, and let's create a safe space for that. Because the more that we can affirm and see these things as treasures that are trying to reveal parts of ourselves, then the better response that we'll have to it, and welcoming our whole self into a greater place of alignment. So thank you for joining us this week on re-identifying, relabeling anxiety. And I look forward to seeing you next week as we explore just some other parts of it, right? We are going to look at how our memories impact us. We're going to look at how we piece together stories. We're going to look at our physical responses. And some of this can help you. Some of it might help your children or just other people that you know. So yeah, thanks for joining us this week.